Well, hello. Thank you for having me, and thank you for coming to my talk, even though it's the one-track conference. You're stuck with me, so So I'm going to be talking about design systems at scale, specifically at Adobe. And hello, I'm Sarah. I'm a design engineer at Adobe, which basically means I do whatever any day. I'm a designer turned developer turned designer-developer is how I like to call it. And I work on our design system called Spectrum. It's our logo. And here's our unofficial logo. That's my manager, Gavin. So very briefly, since everybody has already done this thing, what a design system is to us is a collection of products that help us scale our design practice. It ends up being a lot of things, which we'll go over in a bit, but for us, scale really means getting the best results with the least duplication of effort. So like, not doing things 100,000 times, and not like DevOps-y things. It's not serving a gajillion users and having 9 nines of uptime. That's not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about efficiency, really. And it's keeping your designs dry, so not repeating yourself. And apart from this just being a lot more effort than doing things once, it actually leads to fragmentation. So that means we don't share our resources as much, and it kind of leads to one-off changes. And when things are different in one place than another place, it ends up being a worse user experience usually. And it ends up being harder to onboard and move around in the code base. And things just get out of date. So what are we actually dealing with when I talk about scale? Well, Adobe's kind of cray-cray. So we have over 250 designers worldwide, thousands of developers. Don't ask me how many, I don't know. Over 124 products sent to market, and this is just branded products. This doesn't include like utilities, internal tools, things in beta. 4 color themes, light to dark, and you may have seen this in like Photoshop or Illustrator. Available on 6 platforms, so UWP Windows, which apparently isn't a thing anymore. Don't ask me, I don't know. Mac OS Web, iOS, Android, and Web Mobile. Built in multiple frameworks like our React, Vue, and CSS library. And by the way, we just open sourced our CSS library yesterday, so go check it out. It's called Spectrum CSS. I just found out about this today, so they snuck it up on me. Yes, so we have a lot of stuff, which means our opportunities for fragmentation are just pretty infinite, actually. And within that stuff, we have a really large diversity of user things. So like everything from one mobile app like Adobe Scan, which just exists literally just to scan things. And then we have Illustrator, which is like, 1,000+ tools. Fun fact, there's like 3,000 icons in Illustrator alone. And then we have like things that get pretty crazy, just like analytics tools, so graphs and all these other pieces of content which you wouldn't need in a design tool. And within each of those tools, we have 30 years of legacy code and culture. So these are just dialogues just from Illustrator. It's pretty simple to say, well, replace that with one dialogue, duh. But it doesn't end up being that simple usually. So take, for example, a simple button, right? This is our call to action button. It's text on a background, and when you click it, it does something. Well, we have 1,080 official buttons at Adobe. Why? Well, we have variations like our call to action, our primary button, our secondary button, our warning button, our overcolor button. We have subtle versions of each of those things, so it's less intrusive in your design. And then states like default, hover, down touch, keyboard, and focus, and disabled. 4 color themes, as we talked about. And 6 different platforms. This is, so we get these giant things of buttons, and this is just buttons. We have this for every component. So the challenge then becomes to take this in the opposite direction. With all of these options, we have to find a way to communicate effectively so that the user can get the one thing out of those 1,080 buttons that they need. So this talk is basically about how we're managing all of this scale and complexity. So the first thing that we try and do is we just put it all in one place, and hint, that place should not be one really smart designer's head. So the thing that we're doing is what has been talked about several times today, sorry to repeat, but that is design tokens. And we have a system called Spectrum DNA, which lets us write our tokens in JavaScript and then compile them to a bunch of different platforms. And the way that this works is if you take a basic component like a checkbox, we break it down into the most indivisible pieces of things that we can represent with data. So that's things like our border radius. This becomes a variable. And then we end up mapping that to another global alias so that we can change each part, each layer of data without affecting other things if we need to. And then that maps in between here to a spacing variable, which maps to our final pixel value. So that gets a lot of the cross-platform things that we have to deal with out of the way. It's not a complete solution, but it works. And then another thing that we do to help manage scale is just let the robots do it, which is my favorite thing because when they do it, I don't have to. So one of the tools we have is a SVG generator that generates all those crazy UI kits with 1,080 buttons, and that is called Ellen, which comes from it's like a design generator, and they were like, it's a degenerator, and then they were like, it's Ellen, and I was like, okay, whatever, have fun. So one of the things that we did with this was when we were talking about all of our inclusive design audits, we ended up building in a pass-or-fail testing suite. So now that is done by the robots too. And we also have an asset pipeline that we're working on called A for You. I don't know why it's called that. It's assets for you, I guess. And that does all the crazy things automatically because we have an icons team, and literally all they ever do is design icons, which is amazing and crazy and yeah. So we also try and make it easy for users to get their stuff. And this is something that was talked about earlier as well, but we try and meet users where they are, wherever that is. So this is an internal tool that we've been working on. It's an in-app XD tool and is not a feature of XD. Please do not write tweets about how XD has design tools now, or design systems tools. So it just lets users see what they need so they can quickly customize and build what they want. And we have a workflow where you can just build a basic sign-on form just doing this, which is pretty convenient. And they no longer have to do the thing where they look at 1,080 buttons, which is what we are trying to accomplish here. So some of the other things that we have not actually finished right now, but we're thinking about are to get this in the editors as well for developers. So we want to have a code editor plugin for VS Code. One of the pain points that was talked about earlier is when you're using spacing variables, it tends to mess up your mental model. So if I see spacing variable 500, I don't know what pixel value that is unless I do a lot of times tables in my head, which I'm really bad at math, so it doesn't work. So we want to have a thing where it shows you the pixel value next to your variable use, like color swatches. And then we want to also have features on our website, our documentation website, which let you have as many entry points into the system as you want. And a Slack bot, which would be cool, or a GitHub bot. So when people do a pull request, we can tell them all the times they're not using the variables that they should be. So apart from all of that stuff, we love to share the load, which means making it other people's jobs, which is great. So contributions, it is awesome. So part of the things that we went through when we were kind of gearing up our system and taking all of these things that we had from our historical older system that was not quite up for scale was we introduced this inclusion criteria. So the biggest thing here is just it has to be cross-platform. It has to work on all 6 of those platforms. In 4 color themes, And it has to be accessible. This is huge, huge, huge. Please make accessible components. And it has to be documented, etc. So this basically makes it really hard to make a component in our system. Like, there's just so many things that have to happen to make that pass our bar. And a lot of the components that we had from our previous iteration of the system did not pass this bar. So we were like, you can't have our stuff anymore. And designers were rightfully like, why? We need that stuff. So we introduced this new tool, which I built, called Spectrum Precursors. And Spectrum Precursors is basically a website where we list out all of our beta components and things that we've been working on that aren't quite ready but might be useful, and things that other designers are working on that they think we might find useful. And it serves like a corollary purpose where it actually promotes transparency within our design team, so we can actually have like a modicum of consistency just because people are looking at this site and seeing the things that are on there. So with this, we kind of introduced this new layer of complexity. So now we have precursor components, which aren't on our main website yet. So they go to Canon. And then after that, we end up having the status of deprecated. So we have 3 different statuses to uphold right now and have to document all that stuff. But then we also have this, 30 years of legacy code and all these things that, didn't exist as a precursor before, but are in the frameworks now. So we might have like a dialogue that's, from React, and a React developer developed it and added it to the system before we had all this inclusion criteria, and things got all out of whack because it's not a precursor. So we either take those and we add them in as precursors, and as part of that, we might iterate on it a bit. Or we deprecate it and then replace it with a precursor that solves the same issue. So you can imagine, like, with this, there's a lot of different stuff in a lot of different places. And people would come to our website and be looking for the dialogue, and they wouldn't know whether it was a precursor or a main canonical component, or it was just in React. So we have not done this. So I'm using Atlas Kit's example because, my source is cut off, sorry. This is Atlas Kit. They have this master table idea, which lists out all their components, where they are and the version they're in. So this is one of the things that we're doing to address this fragmentation of where things are in our system. And then we want to also add a universal spectrum search so that people can search, and all the locations will be included in that search. So if it's on our React site or our CSS site or our precursor site, they'll have one place to find it. So apart from that, one of the problems that we faced was with versioning, and it kind of snuck up on us. So just as a side note, putting off decisions is a decision. We can talk about design debt and tech debt all day, but decision debt is a thing. And it will bite you in the butt if you're not aware of it, taking it on strategically. So with versioning, we had all these different parts of our system, like precursors, our design components, our React components, our CSS components, and our native components, and they were all versioned differently. Some of them weren't even using Semver. And we kind of roughly would take our design assets and we'd be like, this is Spectrum version 5, and not all of the engineering assets would be at parity for that, so it kind of got confusing. So we're now doing this whole bundling thing where we'll take the status of every part of the system at that point in time and bundle it up and call that a version of Spectrum. So that's our stable version, and then we maintain that one while releasing continuously in a latest version. And then on our website, we show this by having a drop-down in the corner, and that lets you toggle between the latest and stable versions. So one of the other things that we kind of focus on is just, instead of just documenting everything, we want to really sell everybody on our system, because we have, thousands of people who have to use this. We can't go and evangelize to every single one of them or work with every single team. It just doesn't work. So we have to demonstrate our value to these people and have them adopt that way. So We've been known to tell a developer if it isn't documented, it doesn't exist. So not only does it have to be documented, but it has to be explained and taught and demonstrated. Do that, and people will be excited, not about your documentation, but about your product, which this is the quote that I love to live by in design systems. So one of the things that we've done to address this is actually a form builder. This is built by an intern this summer. He was great. He's coming back, yay. So it actually lets you build out forms using our form elements and then export that to XD. And it shows all the spacing variables, and it's like a Lego blocks in the browser. It's fun. And then on top of that, we also have our Spectrum Showcase, or our component playground, sorry. That is basically like our internal storybook, and it makes everything fun, and it also has this feature on the side that shows you all the design tokens that went into that, which the usefulness of this is basically just to show everybody the system behind it. We're not exactly expecting users to like interact with this, but it shows them that there were decisions behind it, and we're doing more work for them, which is great. So in addition to the component playground and the form builder, we also have a thing in the pipeline called Spectrum Showcase, which basically is like a trophy case of Spectrum-y things. So all the things that are using Spectrum effectively that we want to be like, look at this product, it looks so great, and it's consistent, and it's using our stuff, you should too. So that's what that's gonna be when I get there. So the other thing is, what's measured is managed. PMs are great for this. I don't know, if you have the resources, hire a PM because, like, God bless Vita. She's great. And a PM manages what's measured. So when we're talking about measurements, we kind of end up talking about things like compliance and adoption and things like mandated and all this craziness that kind of sets people on edge. So we love to really just talk about how we are partners, not police. We are not the design police. We don't even have enough people to be the design police if we wanted to. So the way that we measure this is with this internal scorecard initiative called Spectrum Scorecards, and this came out of conversations that we had with like Airbnb and Google. But essentially, we roll up all of the things that we can measure about Spectrum in your product into one number, and that is for our uses and for executive uses as well. So it starts with the self-assessment, which is just, are you even using Spectrum? Are you ready to get this level of support from us? And then we train them on how to do that, or our designers do it for them. And then we have a Spectrum assessment, which is, are you using our colors properly? Are you inclusive? Are you doing spacing properly? Are you using our components? And we give them one objective number, which is key, and then they can take it from there and improve on that. The key thing here is that this is really, it's more for us than for anybody else, because we want to know that we are meeting these teams' needs. And if we're not, then it's not that they're not using Spectrum right or they're doing everything wrong. It means that we're not doing our jobs right, and we need to know what we can do to actually get them that score higher. So this is, again, not our stuff. This is Segment from Evergreen. But what they're doing is they're measuring the adoption of the components on the code side, and then they have an adoption dashboard which shows week over week and all these cool visualizations. And they open source the tool they used to build this, so go do that, because that is awesome. So basically, this all comes down to these really 4 things. Is you have to establish trust in the system. So versioning and setting expectations really helps you do that. And then you actually have to, have canonization so that people know when they use something from your system, it has to be good for all of their use cases. And then we implement at scale, so all those crazy code things that we do to make things consistent and the developer experience where we want it to be. And then we actually try to design at scale, so we have to have 1,080 buttons on a UI kit and maintain that somehow. And we measure success through all of the things that I already talked about, which is fun. Thank you so much for coming.